Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the War Report. Coming off another successful episode with Geo. Thank you once again to him, and I apologize for the slight delay on that episode, technical difficulties. It seems like literally everything I did with that episode, every piece of technology I was working with, it just gave me a hell of a fight. I don't. Those things just happen sometimes. So I thank you guys for bearing with me with a couple day delay on that. And I also thank you for the further delays because we were very busy this past weekend, and let's just say some things didn't go quite as planned because, as avid Blump haters, we were at the No Kings protests, and we were detained for expressing our
Yeah,
First
yeah.
Amendment rights. Okay, that's look. One of us is not even a U.S. citizen here. Okay, so you were in ICE
I took a big
custody.
risk.
You were in ICE custody for a while, but
Yeah.
I was able to talk him out. You told him you were an Albanian organ harvester. Like, oh, that's a vital part of the economy. You're one of those migrant laborers. We need you.
Yeah. I
But
spoke Macedonian backwards and I said that's Albanian.
and it works. We
And
fooled
it works.
the MAGA chuds with our advanced races. But no, we as far as I know, we were not at the No Kings protest. But as far as I do know about them, if I'm on this stupid tangent, most of the people there were either your age or older. Though it was not a very let's just say it did not have the youthful energy of revolution that one would expect, which is to be
No,
expected.
these are boomers and Gen Xers.
I mean, which is to be expected of a society. I think the average American is now like over 40 years old if you like spread it out over a graph. And that's one of the younger Western nations. Now, a lot of that has to do with immigration patterns, and there's a whole thing there, which I'm sure you all know about. I don't need to sit here for the next 20 minutes and explain this. But yeah, it, it I will say it's irrelevant, but it's funny, so I wanted to talk about it first, just so I can make the joke. But I will say it took me back to 2016, 2017. It was very entertaining, and like I said, as much love lost as there is between me and I can only imagine you and Trump now, moments like this are just it's
Yeah.
I can't help but laugh. It's still too fun.
Yeah, I mean, America's a great source of comedy.
The most farcical empire that has ever dominated the world. Who would have thought? But speaking of clowns and comedy, I think we have some news related to Zelensky, or something like that. If you want to get started.
Oh, I thought we were going to talk about Mickey Mouse wearing a yarmulke. Anyways, never mind.
Well, it doesn't always.
um, yeah, if that's where you want to start, then that's where we start.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and bring up the maps whenever you're ready. I imagine you'll
Yeah.
want to start in order. Uh,
Yes, so we'll we'll go with Vovchansk. Um, so as you can see here, those pale green outlines are chunks that the Russians have managed to take from Vovchansk. This has been going on for quite a few days and weeks, and they recently took a farmstead with some larger buildings, as people might know, or maybe they don't know. Vovchansk is a heap. It is destroyed. It is one of the most difficult places for troops to find cover. And anyhow, the Russians have managed to move here pretty quickly, all things considered, which means to me that the Ukrainians are not prioritizing Vovchansk as much as other regions. There's still fighting going on in Sumy. Alexandrivka, I think, is a town where the Ukrainians made new incursions. The Russians have also made incursions in the island chain in the Dnieper, immediately adjacent to Kherson city. They took some pretty big islands, but there is no crossing yet. And I don't know if this is a feint. I kind of speculated when the Russians started moving into Sumy that might be really just to keep the Ukrainians off balance and keep a proportion of their forces located in Sumy. Remember that they had a lot of elite units in this region. So anyways, if we go to the next slide, here's why Vovchansk is maybe more important, and that's because it's the one big town, or was a town until it became a heap, before you reach the city of Kharkov, which is the second largest city in Ukraine. It's like, or was, 1.1 million people.
I believe
Uh,
once called the Jewel of the Russian Empire.
yes, and apparently, Kiev. I don't know what the population is now, but was roughly 3.1 million when the war got started. It was significantly higher even before the war, though. So these arrows indicate the kind of highways from where, after taking the rest of Vovchansk, the Russians may be able to move. Now, the
But just
the
to
arrow.
touch on your
Mm,
statement, Kiev is currently at 2.9 million as of 2025
2.9.
estimates.
Oh wow. Okay, so it has lost a few 100,000 people, I guess, so 100,000. So you see those arrows. Of course, there are two arrows that are pointing southwards. That's towards Kharkov, but the arrow pointing to the right may be where the Russians will go next, because they would probably want to link this area with Kupiansk eventually. There is another territory, very small, much smaller than what you see here, about maybe 25% the size of Vovchansk, in my estimates. I'm sorry, I don't have a slide for it. That is in the middle between Vovchansk and Kupiansk. And my guess is they're going to want to link this area because, I was perplexed why the Russians initially were crossing the Oskol River north of Kupiansk in order to attack it. Now it makes complete sense. It is because going from east to west was just too difficult. And the river always was a barrier. And the Russians, somewhere along the way, went with this crazy idea to cross the Oskol River, but north of Kupiansk. And that kind of leads us into Kupiansk. So the next slide, you can see that Kupiansk is, well, I mean, it's almost all taken. Um, And this territory that's been taken, that you see, the part that drops down south, is all west of the Oskol River. And as I said last time, once Kupiansk falls, a lot of that blue territory that you see on the right side of this salient will diminish, because it will become very hard for the Ukrainians to be supplied in these areas where there's mainly open fields, except there is the town of Petropavlovsk, which is next to Kupiansk. Well, it's a little further outside of uh, the eastern side of Kupiansk. It's closer to where you see the orange outline on the right side. Um, let's go in a little bit deeper, and get a sense of the territories that were taken. So um, these territories were taken just in the last couple of days, um, in the southern extreme. I've outlined an area where there is some apartment complexes. They're not very big, it's not substantial, but the gains that you see the Russians have made northeast of here is where there was a school of some kind. And by the looks of it, quite large. It looks to be at least 1 or 2 blocks wide. So this is an important area. Much of the fortifications in the industrial area to the north of the school area have been taken by the Russians in the last week. And let's zoom in again just to take a better look at the complex that the Russians have captured here. Yeah, so that's where Kupiansk is going. And now let's look at the northern front, where it fits in the larger scheme of things. Um, right at the top is where you have Kupiansk. Of course, all of the orange instead of the red is in the Kharkov region. And essentially, this is the Oskol River that winds its way down, and we get to where there's been a lot of intensive fightings, and the Russians have struggled really hard in the last year to get closer to Liman. But I would say since late July, early August, the Russians have made a lot of progress here. So we'll begin with the basic gains in the Liman direction. All of these gains are in the northern section. So the next slide will show you that the green outlines show you what the Russians have captured in the last couple of days or week, and the red outlines show you what they've captured today. Today is October the 23rd. It's in the evening, so it's already probably a bit of old news. Um, so let's do a zoom in of this small territory that's been taken. Uh, Essentially, the Russians have crossed one of the other rivers. This could be the Zherebets River. People can correct me if I'm wrong. I could be wrong, but Serechne is the town that the Russians secured some time back. So what they're doing here is they're expanding their zone of contact, so that the salient isn't so narrow and prone to counterattacks. And then south of that area, we get into more of the Liman front proper. Um, so you can see that the Russians have moved further south. They've overtaken two significant fortifications, but more importantly, now they've consolidated almost complete control, not over just the trench network, but you can't really see it. It's just south of the yellow line that's in a arch. There's a road there, and so now the Ukrainians can no longer use that road. And the of course Stavki is the town right below it, and that is where the Russians want to be. uh, is uh, uh, is a small logistical hub for Liman. Um, the next slide will give you a better idea of what I'm trying to say. So I've circled in red at the bottom of the slide. That's Liman, the city, and then those red arrows follow the contour of the road that I'm talking about. So the Russians need to secure this road first before they go further south into towns like Stavki and also move westward from their eastern flank. Um, the next slide will show you what the basic attack for Liman will probably be, because one of the two northern roads to supply Liman have been cut now. They're pretty close to the other one, but of course, Liman has other ways of getting supplies from the west, and that's still something that is very important for the Ukrainians to still hold on to Liman. Nonetheless, let's move to Pokrovsk. Lots has been going on. Take a look at this slide. You can see that since the last show, big chunks have been taken in the Pokrovsk salient. Um, Pokrovsk itself is over 50% under Russian control. The most difficult parts in the Shashtarsky district, where all the apartment complexes are, the Russians got that pretty quick. Now, I mean, pretty quick after months and months, but it very rapidly accelerated. This all happened Saturday, where huge chunks in this southern region of Pokrovsk were taken. There are rumors that the Ukrainians are planning to evacuate. I say rumors because some of the things I read seem to indicate that it's a for sure thing. Maybe it is. In the northern salient of Pokrovsk, the Ukrainians did have a successful counterattack. But before we get there, notice that the red outline where the three red pistols are in Mirnograd, So in Mirnograd, you can see that the Russians took over two fortifications, and now they're moving closer towards southern Mirnograd. Now, the thing with southern Mirnograd is now there is a waste heap. It looks like a waste heap in the southern section. It has, of course, a lot of residential areas, but there is a bottleneck, and that bottleneck is filled with apartment complexes. So that could be a strong holdout for the Ukrainians. It could even act as a place where they have a better retreat than they had, let's say, out of Avdiivka. Okay. The next slide is a blow up of the very region that I'm talking about. You'll see where the Russians have made the gain. Now, the Russians have moved into this is sort of late breaking news. They've moved into the eastern outskirts of Roditske, or is it Roditske or Rodink? Let me see if I can. I think it's, yeah, Roditske. So the Russians have moved into Roditske, which is directly north of Mirnorad and Pokrovsk. This is a very, very important town.
This is the artery.
This is, yes, this is one of the arteries. There is one more, and we'll get to it, but that is the town that the Russians, I think, really want before they press further into Mirnorad. And the reason I say this is there are some speculators on sort of the Russian side on Telegram who are saying not enough forces have gone into Roditske or into the Mirnorad region right now that would make them that would not make them susceptible to counterattacks by the Ukrainians. So we'll wait and see. But so far, about a third of Roditske to the north has been already taken. And lastly, with the Pokrovsk front, we'll look at the northern salient. This is a salient north of Roditske, and you can it's very faint. I apologize, but since last week, as you can see, the Russian salient in the north has collapsed in the Kuchervik. You know what? It's easier for me to just read it in Cyrillic. Kucherver Yar. So that has fallen. The Russians have moved out of Vilna. It's in the gray zone because now what the Russians are doing is they are simply attacking any Ukrainian troops that go in here, and they're going to hold on to Noveshachove. But as you can see, this is a town that's gone back and forth between the Ukrainians. So those are the Ukrainian gains, but look at the big blob outline in green. That's taken a few days to take since Saturday. Like I say, Saturday, Sunday, this past weekend was a big day for the Russians. And what the Russians will want is to take Shahove. So Shahove is now it's very fragile for the Ukrainians because you can see the salient that the Ukrainians have going down south. They've already lost territory in this area, and the Russians, I would bet, are less concerned with how far north the salient they have here. So they're less concerned with the northern section of the salient than they are with the eastern section, because it is the eastern section that has the towns, and this is all the towns also lie along the contours of a river. So that's another reason why they will they're willing to give up something for the north in order to take Shahove and the other towns east of there. Okay. Then we move to the Zaporozhye front, the Western Donetsk front, and the Dnepropetrovsk front. This is a nexus of three different territories for the Ukrainians, and the Russians made some very big gains here, particularly today. They finally took over all of Ivanivka, and what appears to be like a big swoop, because you can see the green outlines and the red outlines are much bigger. You can also see that there were many points of contact. That's why it has so many pistols signs. So I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 uh, points of attack, and then there's a region to the south and east of here where there were 3 points of attack. So the Russians are expanding this area. They're going to want to go further north in the direction of Pokrovsk, but they're also making inroads to, in Zaporozhye to go west. But we'll deal with that in another show. There weren't that many gains in the last few days there. So let's take a blow up of Ivanivka. You can see the territory that the Russians took. Honestly, this is a pretty big gain for one day, which leads me to believe that the Ukrainians, again, there's a manpower shortage. And the town that the Russians want to focus on, of course, you can see it, it is just northeast of this area, Novopavlovka. They will want that as a hub, and they will want that as a hub to push further north towards Pokrovsk. And lastly, let's look at the little region where the Russians took that area. And it's not that significant. And then finally, this slide will demonstrate the why they want to take and the direction that they will use in order to take Novopavlovka, in order to isolate it before they move further north towards Pokrovsk. Because despite the Russian gains in Pokrovsk proper, they haven't been able to push further west immediately adjacent to Pokrovsk, unless we're talking about an area several kilometers south of there, and that's what this area is. Now, I want to preface before we get into this. Of course, the next bunch of slides I'm going to show you are from um, History Legends, great channel, and these slides that you've already been looking at are Weeb Union, another great channel. They used to do some shows together. I love these two guys because the guy from History Legends, the in-depth analysis,
Very much
and
so.
Weeb Union does the daily analysis and switching and gaining of territories on the Ukrainian battlefield. So the big thing that is, I mean, it's not
But wait,
like
hold on. I
huge.
have one question for you about them.
Uh-huh.
Do they condemn all violence in the world?
They do. They do. Not like the way Dima does. Dima r- really, really condemns all violence of any kind anywhere in the world.
Oh, it's
I like
wonderful.
I like how he says that. He goes, "I'm legally covered." There it is.
No, it's
I,
it's a great just blanket statement. We should start doing
yeah, we condemn. So there were a bunch of vehicles here that the Ukrainians were using to resupply Mirnorad. And I mean, yes, there were some pickup trucks, but there were also some Max Pros from the US, no Bradleys, some 113s, some Turkish Kiripis. They had a Canadian Rochelle Senator, at least one Ukrainian BTR-4, which is a really awesome infantry fighting vehicle, very strong, um, and some other equipment. Now, there's at least 16 vehicles that have been destroyed, and
And I believe the
some
original source
estimate
that
it's
even they pulled from was Lost Armor.
yes, all of them are confirmed hits. Now, I should mention that in this region, the Russians made a push. It might have been to Ivanivka, where they lost like 6 or 7 vehicles as well. And there's this debate about, do you lose more men when you have an armored column or when you do small raids of 2, 3, maybe 4 guys on motorcycles, right? So one argument is you lose less if you use motorcycles, but if the motorcycles don't make progress, you actually will lose more. because when if unless it's just one or two armored vehicles that gets hit, when it's many, one go, okay, remember that at one go, then the amount of casualties of men is actually quite a bit lower. Of course, if it's over a prolonged period of time, then it's different. So, uh, so here's a map, and this ties into our analysis of the Pokrovsk front. Um, you can see that I mentioned Raditske. Now that's to the north. Of course, this is deep state map, which is half the time delusional. The Russian gains in this area are more substantive than here. But the town from where these vehicles are originating from is Hrishenye. Hrishenye. Um, and they're trying to resupply Leningrad. Now, the red outline there that you see near where it says 12 kilometers, that is where there's this heap of Ukrainian armor that has been gathering. I say that because these 16 to 20 vehicles represent about 4 or 5 weeks from like mid-September to mid-October or up until like a few days ago, right? Do watch History Legends. He has a great breakdown. I don't want to spoil everything here. I'm not doing it justice anyway, so you should take a look at it.
Absolutely. I
And
was listening to it
and as I
yesterday.
say, he hasn't covered this, but the Russians have had these kinds of losses as well. So it's I'm not picking sides as I mean I am, but obviously,
No, we're a completely
but
neutral program. This everything you hear
yeah,
is
and we're against
objective
violence, all
analysis.
violence of any kind.
Exactly.
We're
Thank
we're
you.
we're the first geopolitical show that abhors violence even on Mars and the moon. No one has done it yet. We're the first. So
Well, I'm glad that we could plant that flag somewhere.
yeah, yeah, I'm proud of it. So this is the general area where these vehicles were destroyed, and then lastly is the picture of the vehicles. Even that strange Swedish armored vehicle that is in two parts. It articulates. It's like it's kind of like a train where the two are conjoined. Anyways, um, and just to prove to everybody that I am not anti-Ukrainian,
Oh yes, we'll go ahead and get this up.
my ancestry.com got updated, the biggest update in their history, and well, wait, I have to. I could dox myself here.
No, it's okay. I've already made the proper edits.
Okay. So why don't you show them?
So I'm getting it up. I'm making sure that we don't expose your mug. So let me get that up here, and this should be sufficient. There we go.
So, what do you know? I'm 11% Western Ukrainian. Now, I do also have a little bit of Czech and German. And my mom, God rest her soul, she had 9% West Ukrainian, 5% Slovak, and 2% Polish. So I find that interesting. I was honest. I never would have thought, and I, I was joking with some of the people at church, and I said, "Am I a Nazi?"
Well, I do. I know you didn't want to dox yourself, but I will say your name is Mikola Banderachuk. If you want to track this guy down.
Yes.
But on a similar note, I don't have the screenshot prepared. We're also covered on the anti-Semitism base because I got my updates around the
Oh
same
yes,
time,
that's right.
and I am. They replaced most of the Southern Italian group I had with Levantine, so I am 13% Syrian. Okay, so I am a Semite. I'm probably more Semitic than a lot of Ashkenazis out there, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, and you know what? That's why you supported Assad, and I support you. So of course I'm gonna support Assad.
that that
You got
that
to look after your people.
Yeah,
So
I'm also glad that you're brave enough to dissent against the Zelensky government, despite being such a having such a strong affinity for Ukraine.
Yeah.
That's very brave of you, my friend.
But I'll be honest with you. I'll be honest with you. Like growing up, well, like my youngest brother, he said, he goes, I'm not surprised. Come on, man. We don't, because he would say like we don't look a lot like a lot of people from that region. So so anyways, I thought that was kind of funny.
Ruthenian colonists.
Really, yes. Well, I mean, there was that kind of, um, especially after the Mongols, right? A lot of Ruthenians um, moved into like Western Ukraine, but particularly the Carpathians and Slovakia and everything. And Ruthenians, I found them fascinating, to be honest. And for a few years, I attended a Ruthenian Orthodox church that was like part of the Ecumenical Church of Greece or whatever. But and there were still people in there that were like Ukrainian, that like could speak. Well, not Ukrainian. They insisted they were Ruthenians. I know that drives some Ukrainians nuts, but
Well, to the point where they
I'm just
eliminated
telling you what.
to the point where they eliminated it as a census option in Ukraine.
Yeah, but the thing that makes the Ruthenians interesting, okay, is because they claim that they mixed with Slovaks and Croatians, the so-called white Croatians of that region before they moved into the Balkans. My mom and I also have quite a bit of like we also have DNA from Croatia from two separate regions. So, anyways,
But
but
while we're at it, do you want to
that's to be expected. That's to be expected.
while you're at it, do you want to bring up the mark of shame we also discussed off air?
You're gonna hate me, but which mark of shame?
The one that starts with A and ends with Libanians.
Oh yes. Unfortunately, that is also in my DNA.
I told him he was fired on the spot, and that if he doesn't wow me tonight, like, this is the last episode of the War Report ever. I'm not even gonna find a new co-host. Like, I am so ashamed. I'm just closing shop. But yeah. So I'll have to break down my results at some point, and we can have the audience decide who's whiter. But in the end, I think it's kind of like a race to the bottom with that, because I don't think either of us are quite that white. But that's beside the point. Uh, yes, but you know what? This is a POC program, so we can get away with a lot more than we could otherwise. So we're actually quite brave for speaking the truth without our white privilege. So you guys should appreciate that we come on here every week or so and do this show. Yeah, and we were out there protesting for you at No Kings. If I'm going to keep bringing this
Yeah.
up, wait, I'm sorry. It was No Tyrants for you because they had to change the Canadian label one.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, that's right. And I, I wish we could return to the world of just 2017 and just mock like boomer lib delusions. This would be a lot easier, but it would also be a lot less interesting. Okay. But with all that being said, speaking of boomer lib delusions, we do have some news about Zelensky and Ukraine's prospects with the Trump-Zelensky meeting and the question of the Tomahawks, and ultimately the will it happen Budapest summit, and we'll get into all that over the next few minutes here. So, to establish a brief timeline, Trump was on his back and forth, and then because he felt spurned by Russia, not accepting the greatest peace deal ever, he threatened to give Ukraine Tomahawks. We discussed this actually a couple weeks ago. And I can't recall whether I brought it up at the time, but it was always a strange threat because Tomahawks are primarily ship-based weapons. Now, there are
Yes.
ground-based systems for them. As far as I'm aware, there's no aircraft-based systems for them, which for the Ukrainians, I mean, what are they gonna attach to one of two F-16s and fire one at the other? Who knows? It could be given their track record with those. So it always seemed like a strange proposal, and that Trump was saber rattling as usual. And then Peskov comes out and reports a very useful and productive, those are the words used to describe it. Typically it's friendly, it's warm, it's whatever, but a very useful and productive phone call between Trump and Putin shortly after that. And you get Trump going through his official media channels of Truth Social, the most trusted source of anything Trump, because that's apparently where he puts out all of his messaging these days, which is another matter entirely, saying that him and Putin are going to meet in Budapest, Hungary. I mean, great city for it, big parliament building. I, I mean, the photo ops would have been fantastic for starters, but the political
That's why they. Yes, go ahead. Go
the
ahead.
the political reality of it was just a non-starter. I mean, down to the question of they were trying to plant. Everyone was speculating on Putin's flight route to get there. And most people speculated
Yeah.
it would be through Turkey, through the Balkans into Hungary, because Poland said, "Oh, we'll shoot down Putin's plane." Or, of course, the Baltic states might actually. If the Baltic states could polish off their two Mosin Nagants, they might take a few pot shots at it. And one of those pot shots might be lucky enough to hit it. Those things have pretty long ranges. But no, it looks like the Estonian sharpshooters are not going to have their day in the sun. Fortunately for all of us, I would say, because the ramifications of that would be disastrous regardless. But it was almost instantly a non-starter. You had Lavrov and Rubio report their conversations, so on and so forth, more business as usual. And now it looks like the deal fell apart, and it
Yeah.
it's to the point where Trump is like, "Oh, I never said that," kind of thing. I mean, that's not exactly what he's doing, but in effect, that's what he's doing.
Yeah.
And this is allegedly after him and Zelensky met at the White House, and Trump threw starburst at Zelensky and said, "Don't say I never gave you anything." Sorry, that was Merkel. He did that too. Much better times. But apparently, Zelensky brought out his deep state maps, and Trump said, "You actually trust deep state? We use I don't know, who would Trump be a fan of? I could see him.
Dima.
Yeah. Trump would
The
like
peace
Dima.
president likes
Yes.
the guy who
Yeah,
is
and
against all
yeah,
violence
and then
anywhere.
Trump brought the military summary maps, and yeah, they started bickering and throwing things, and unfortunately there were no cameras, so we didn't get another Trump-Zelensky feud live on camera. But knowing the trend, they'll probably meet up at the Vatican or whatever and kiss and make up, maybe quite literally in that case. I don't know, or maybe it'll be facilitated by Macron or Starmer because Trump just has an undying need to impress both of them for whatever reason. He just is he's obsessed with the approval of center left figures, and you saw this. He was like this with Trudeau. He's like this whenever he meets with Mark Carney. Like he'll go on his tangents, talk about we're being treated so unfairly in trade and defense spending, but then like these people they just electrify him in no other way. Like the only other person I've seen him act like with is uh, conversely enough Putin, and maybe the late Shinzo Abe if you want to go down that road, but that's a few years off from that. But uh, once again, Trump does a complete 180 on this after this alleged freakout, which people are speculating whether or not happened. Yeah, it probably did. Yes, Zelensky probably started it. And will Trump make any changes? Will he reevaluate his position? Will he, I don't know, maybe appoint somebody to be national security advisor who would fulfill this role instead of just having Rubio play the role of both national security advisor and secretary of state and giving us, what you'd expect from Rubio, which is just more bog standard neocon policy. No, that's not going to happen. The Budapest summit is not going to happen. As much as, like I said, it would have been a great photo op. It would have done great things to boost the legitimacy of Orban, who has mounting pressure both domestically and in a roundabout way from Brussels, and frankly, probably from some elements of the State Department as well. But no, that all fell apart. So he's standing there with egg on his face. Putin is looking at this. I mean, the idea that if we're to believe the official story, Trump proposed the meeting venue for the second meeting. That was a weak enough move already. I mean, what should have happened in my infallible opinion, of course, because I'm always right about these kind of things, is that in my opinion, to parallel meeting in Anchorage, Alaska, the next summit had to be in Vladivostok, Eastern Russia, straight
Yeah.
flight from the U.S. The only other territory you're crossing over, if even, is Canada, which America controls Canadian airspace. Who are we kidding? Trump goes to Trump goes to Vladivostok. They have the meeting there. They shake hands, and then they repeat. But ultimately, and I think I've said this before, but I've maintained since the beginning of the war, even if I haven't said it that often, I think the only sizable country that's not like a Singapore or like some other country that just exists to be a venue for greater countries to discuss issues. The only sizable country I think that would be suitable to discuss these issues is Kazakhstan. They are on good terms with the United States, certainly on good terms with the Russians. It needs to be in Astana, I think, if there's going to be any sort of serious peace agreement. And I don't know, maybe one of the East Asian countries, like I said, Singapore, or maybe even Vietnam, because I know that Vietnam has also, when Trump met with Kim the second time, that was the venue they used. But like I said, as much as I would have loved for Hungary to be the host of that summit in order to really boost its legitimacy, both at home and abroad, and somebody who gets on well with both Trump and Putin, that would have been great. But aside from a location in Russia or Kazakhstan, or like I said, one of the other smaller countries I had mentioned, it was a non-starter, and that's assuming these summits and negotiations could even be conducted in good faith at this point. Because, I mean, let's discuss the alleged offer that was going into Budapest, where the Russians gained the entirety of Donetsk and Lugansk. However, they freeze the front line in Zaporozhye and Kherson. At this point, what we're looking at is Russian constitutional claims, because they had the referendum. And whether you believe the referendum is a real rig, put that aside for just a moment. Russia legally considers the boundaries of these oblasts as part of the Russian Federation. Therefore, why would they cede them? And on top of that, what credibility would they have if they're saying these are eternal parts of Russia, they voted in the referenda, and then they freeze the front line, leaving the Ukrainians to occupy half of them? Not that I think that would have happened in the first place, but that was the alleged deal discussed. So that was a non-starter. And the only way there's going to be a successful U.S.-Russia summit at this point is either just shelve the Ukraine issue, discuss actual bilateral cooperation between the United States and Russia on a number of issues, particularly the Arctic Circle, economic cooperation, security cooperation. I mean, we have the START Treaty coming up to its expiration date in, I believe, February of 2026, so less than 6 months away, which that's one of the last vestiges of U.S.-Russia arms control. So if something is not done with that, we could be very easily looking at another arms race between the United States and Russia, which I don't think is a position anyone wants to be in. But I also don't see the willingness to negotiate, particularly on the American side, but also the Russians at this point. They're assessing the situation. They're saying, well, what's the point of trying to negotiate this? And really, with that, and you had just sent me a statement from that Putin had made, which is saying the canceled summit was proposed by the United States and not the Russian side, which is not to, I think, really anyone's surprised, because it's Trump wants his ninth war ended. That's what he keeps saying.
Yeah.
Say what you will about the Russian approach to this war, but they're satisfied to fight this thing to its natural conclusion. Now, I think there's a lot of questions that need to be asked about what that natural conclusion looks like, what post-war arrangements look like. But that's not the question here, because it is the American side, particularly Donald Trump, who keeps insisting on a political settlement to this war, yet will not take the only viable political settlement. I mean, frankly, and maybe I am misreading the situation right here, but I would assume if there was any wise and prudent policymaker in the West, they would look at the proposal thus far, the Istanbul 2024 proposal, and they would say, okay, if we accept this, this is going to create discontent in Russia, because this is going to be viewed as a half measure, and this war is going to start again in 5 years, as far as the Russians are concerned, which is probably a valid concern, if I'm being honest. And they could take that. If they want to drive a stake through the heart of Putin's political capital, take this deal. And I know the Russians put this deal on the table because they know it's their formality. They know it will not be accepted, but it's to show the world that we're a reasonable party. We're willing to negotiate. We have our set list of terms. Let's come to the table and let's make it happen. But like I said, if the bluff were to be called on that, they could cause far more political instability within internal Russian politics than I think just about anything, unless they were willing to dedicate full force NATO to this war.
I completely agree. I completely agree. The Russians do make that offer, which scares a lot of Russians. I know some of them that are disappointed. They want Putin to go harder, much harder. They want to see Zelensky dead. They want why they're basically saying, why can't Russia do what Israel does? Just kill them. I would say uh, there are several reasons, and maybe by looking at Iran is why, and that is, like Iran, Russia has to develop a list of allies it can rely on, and it has to sway the global opinion on its side. Now, except for the West, the global opinion is on their side, just as it is for Iran, but probably to an even greater degree than Iran. And if they start acting in a certain way that the Israelis do, they could lose that. That's one potential. The other is, of course, this idea that Zelensky has like a lot of bad decisions, and you can argue whether Zelensky is making those decisions or not. You can argue who would replace him. Would they not be worse? But the thing is maybe the only strategy for a Ukrainian victory would have been not to fight over every single city and turn it into a meat grinder. And instead, what they could have done early on is allow the Russians to come in with what was then a force well under 200,000. Some people speculated it was as low as 150. Some say it was 170.
The figure I always
Some
heard
say
thrown around was 190.
190. I heard 180, 170. But like I say, some people that I listen to who are professors and whatnot claim it was 150. If you don't include the Donbass region fighters, whatever it is, it's under 200,000. They were at number 2 to 3 or 3 to 2 by the Ukrainians at that time. It would have been an opportune time for the Ukrainians if they allowed them to gain territory and then use their hit and run tactics that they're so good at, right? And basically to like, you allowed the Russians to develop big cauldrons, which they kind of did, um, that were not very well manned. Now that worked in the Kharkov and Sumy region. Not necessarily Sumy, although that was affected, but the other one, the region between Kharkov and Sumy. Oh boy.
Chernigov?
Huh?
Chernigov?
Chernigov. Yeah. So it kind of worked there, but what one theory I've listened to is allowed them to like have their logistics compromised by being outmanned and like suffer even greater defeats. But the Ukrainians didn't do that, and then they had the summer offensive of 2023, which was um, a disaster. I mean, I showed you slides of like 16 to 20 vehicles. None of them are tanks, but that wasn't the case in Zaporozhye. Uh, Lots of tanks, lots of Bradleys, lots of them. They lost like 20% that year of the entire inventory in that summer. So, and the Bradleys are proven to be very good vehicles, right? There's no question. I know they made some movie with Kelsey Grammer about how they're, you know, but it's a vehicle that's been refined and has proven itself. Okay. So, anyways, that didn't happen, and they think the reason it didn't happen is because Zelensky is, a bad wartime strategist. But I mean, does Putin really believe he's calling the shots? I doubt it.
Oh, of course not.
Right?
I mean,
Of
it's
course
it's
not.
been
Right?
clear since before the beginning of this war. It has been fought by NATO commanders. It's been fought from NATO command centers. What was that piece we read on air where it was that one base in Germany that was pretty much central command for Ukraine, and that Trump was allegedly dismantling. I think that was a New York Times piece about that.
Yes, yes,
But
I recall, but the name escapes
yeah,
me as well.
the name escapes me. It was somewhere in Germany, or I think Germany, not Poland, because Poland was more of a logistical hub. But they went through this whole thing and they interviewed the generals there, and it's clear cut that this is where Ukrainian decisions are being made. In which case, it does give the Ukrainians the advantage in the sense that while the Russians have hit command centers in Ukraine, most of the vital command centers are in NATO countries. They are not going to be hit by the Russians for that matter. Whereas you
Right.
do get Ukraine, like the odd Ukrainian strike when they can successfully manage it against Russian command centers. Like I said, it's not very often, not as often as they want you to think, but they do have the advantage in that regard, and that is thanks to mostly somebody like Budanov, who does propose those more radical operations. Uh, but
You know what? I will say this. In a year's time, I haven't seen them. Like in 2025, I haven't seen the Ukrainians hit any command center.
no, no,
There were those assassinations of two different generals. Not these aren't like guys that are commanding,
yeah, one was like the
armies. One of them
WMD
is like
expert.
for toxology, right? He's there to, basically he had info on what the Americans were doing in some of the laboratories and concerning COVID in Ukraine. I mean, that's hardly like a strategic general. He's not even involved in the war. Um, in any case, there really hasn't been anything like that, and I don't, so I think 2025 is different that way than 2023 or 2024.
Yes, I do think a lot of the security, the gaping security holes that we did see throughout 2024, especially, have been sealed. That they have cracked down on the
Yeah,
infiltrators and the subversive elements within Russian intelligence that did allow for these things to happen. Because, I mean, like I said, our show has all the biases that it does, but if we're being honest, the Russians had several intelligence failures, going all the way back to 2022. That the Ukrainians
yeah.
were, it was like Swiss cheese, holes all over. The Ukrainians were able to sabotage everyone. I mean, Operation Spiderweb is probably the most infamous example as of late. And
Yeah.
while it didn't do as much damage as they would have like you to believe it did, the fact that such an operation could even be carried out to any degree shows that there are some glaring flaws here.
And that's another example because it was the British who organized that.
Oh yeah, it's the
That, yeah.
yeah,
So,
and the MI6 has been probably even more instrumental than the CIA with that. I mean, I know that these intelligence agencies are all pretty much in bed together, especially the Western ones, especially the Five Eyes ones. But this seems like something the CIA has outsourced the MI6 into British intelligence, and they have done a let's just say rather impressive job, regardless of what one thinks of the mission. That objectively they have done their task. And also, when it comes to the constant harassment of the Russian Navy in the Black Sea, that is also mostly thanks to British operations. And you could argue that it's practically the British who are fittingly fighting the naval war on behalf of Ukraine. Now, that's a bit of old news. We're talking like 2022, 2023 with that. But going back to the overall point, it's not like Zelensky or even like Zaluzhny or Syrskyi are the ones making the final call on these decisions.
mhm,
It is
mhm.
all NATO command structure.
Right, right. I mean, what America wants is to freeze the conflict. Now, of course, the Europeans came up with a ridiculous 12-point plan. They want Russia to go back to 1991 borders. They want to try Putin and Gerasimov for war crimes. And the tribunal judging them can only be Ukrainians. They want Russia to pay for, like, it's the most absurd demands you could ever imagine. And of course, they know they're absurd demands. And the reason they make those demands is because they know they'll get rejected, and it's just a way of them to perpetuate the war.
Oh, absolutely. Like they're making
That
the kind of
said,
demands
they
that.
want that said, though, they want the war frozen, not stopped, frozen for a short period of time before they can resume, preferably after Putin has left office. That is what irks them the most. Um, yeah, so again, the Russians might be sparing Zelensky, but Zelensky is not the one calling the shots. He's not even popular. He hasn't united the country. This isn't 2022, 2023. People have grown tired of him. And frankly, it what it like as long as I said this even when the war started back in February 2022 that like Russia will take the higher road. Russia will be more um, gallant than the Ukrainians or NATO or America. That's how they will fight this war, and and they need to. And I know this baffles a lot of people, Russians included, but I think that look, that's the decision they've made. I don't know if it's like forever because Ukrainian cities, just like we spoke on the last show, are in the dark right now, particularly Kiev. The Russians have upscaled their attacks on energy resource centers far more than the Ukrainians have.
Well, the Ukrainians have done
So,
plenty of attacks on energy resources.
oh yeah,
I mean, plenty in Russia, but it looks like more recently inside the European Union,
yes, two of them in Hungary.
and one in Romania.
Yep, yep,
I mean,
yes. Thank
and
you for reminding me about
yes,
that. I nearly
and
forgot.
because I did want to bring that up, and I did want to discuss that a little because you have Trump's sanctions on Lukoil, which is a Romanian affiliate of, I believe, Gazprom, one of the Russian energy companies. I think it's Gazprom. Interesting enough, just personal anecdote on that. Uh, During my vacation this past winter, one of the outings we went on was a trip from Belgrade to Timișoara, about a 2 hour drive. And it was interesting because as we got across the Romanian border, the tour guide was telling us that. Well, first he actually stopped us at a Nice Gazprom gas station in Serbia, which had a very good I had a very good hot dog there, but that's beside the point. Uh, and it was interesting to see like, oh, yeah, Gazprom's still in Europe, and people are filling up their cars directly at Gazprom pumps. And when we cross the border, he says that you have Romania in NATO in the European Union, and he points to a Lukoil gas station. He says, well, that's partially Russian owned. So the sanctions, they're more of a political tool than anything. It's more of a a show than anything. And like even with these sanctions packages, you get these 19th, 20th, 21st sanctions packages. Uh, there's so many carve outs and so many exceptions, not just from the usual suspects like Hungary and Slovakia. There are these other countries, like Romania in particular, that are fully on board with this NATO project, yet they're also getting sanctions carve outs, yet they're also getting it. But it looks like Trump is cracking down on that. Trump, even going back to his first term, has had a bone to pick with the Europeans' energy relationship with Russia. In fact, he was one of the reasons Nord Stream was delayed for so long before it got blown up. But Trump has placed those sanctions on Lukoil, and now after that, you have three separate attacks on energy infrastructure in Europe: two in Hungary and one in Romania. And the speculation, I'm not sure how accurate this is because I can believe it's the Ukrainians, I can believe it's the MI6, I can believe it's the CIA just fine. But the claim is it was actually the same people who were behind Nord Stream that are conducting this project. Like I said, I wouldn't go that far. I don't think Volodymyr Z out there, who's taking refuge in Poland, is taking up the mantle again of blowing up energy infrastructure. He could be, but I imagine they probably have more than one team of people they to conduct these kind of operations. But the war, as it has before, has been taken to Europe. We've seen the missile fall down in Poland. That was in 2022. We've seen the fake out drone attacks in Poland this past year. This isn't exactly an attack, but we've seen the Ukrainian ship literal tons of contaminated grains into the European Union and expect thanks for it. And there's been the harassment of Romanian and Moldovan airspace that could later be linked back to Ukraine. You've had the assassination attempt on Fico, which some people speculate the Ukrainians were involved in. You had a potential assassination attempt on Orban involving a car bomb. Some people expect the Ukrainians suspect the Ukrainians were involved in. So more and more and more, and I think this is probably the most drastic examples so far of the energy sabotage, um, not including Nord Stream, because I think Nord Stream is the most blatantly obvious example, that the Ukrainians are doing the proxy work of Brussels and of Washington
Yes,
to punish.
it's perfect. It's
Yes,
so deceitful, and it's perfect because the other Volodymyr or the other Vladimir, who apparently was responsible for the the destruction of Nord Stream. I mean, the whole thing is such a joke. How can people actually even believe this? Um, it will not be tried. The Poles refuse to send him for trial. Of course, they're not going to try him. I mean, they might try him a few years later, but not now. And it's a perfect foil against any you know uh, direct criticism, let's say, of Western regimes.
yes, and they'll try him as a Russian agent. Watch, it'll be 2027, 2028, and they'll say, "Oh well, why would you do that? You're a Russian spy. Why would you blow up a beautiful pipeline that we shut down anyway?" And it'll be like, "It's because I'm a Russian spy. I plead guilty." But I mean, this war, people always talk about, especially people like Mertz and Starmer and Macron. The Russians want to bring this war to Europe. Whatever. The Ukrainians, on behalf of their paymasters, have already brought this war to Europe. That Europe is involved in this war, and not in the way that it expects, not in the way that most people are told that Europe is involved in this war. And arguably, you want to go all the way back to 2022, before 2022. This was just as much a war on Europe as it was on Russia. Now, of course, there are plenty of collaborators within Europe who are happy to help wage this war on Europe itself because they benefit from it as vassals of the American political class, and especially within the UK where they get to be the direct managers. They get to be the outpost of the American Empire's power in Europe. They are more than happy to cooperate with that. We've seen for centuries Perfides Albion is happy enough to lay waste to the continent so long as they get to be on the top of the deck of the cards when the game's done. But that's the price they earn. And look at the British economy. Look at what they have to show for it. We get to help carry out these stupid little operations across the continent. We get to help with these sabotage missions, and you get an economy in a free fall. You get a country that's contemplating an IMF bailout. Look at Germany, who wants to pose itself as the forefront of European industry and defense. You have an industry, manufacturing sector that is floundering without a cheap source of energy. Look at the French who want their strategic ambiguity. Strategic ambiguity. It looks like cowardice and stupidity coming from Macron because that's all he can provide the French people. Once again, with how many prime ministers is he on? Is this the fourth coalition government he's had to form at this point? I
Hmm.
don't even know at this point. Will refuse to call elections. Will refuse to step down and let the political process to the point where he is mulling over a constitutional amendment, the end of the Fifth Republic, the beginning of the Sixth Republic, just in order to renew his mandate because he's coming up on term limits. And Macron would be the type of person who would scrap the Constitution, put a new one forward, ramrod it through, so he can run for another 2 terms or whatever he decides his term limits are going to be, and rule France for 20 years. Because that's what this guy wants. Barring a promotion within the European hierarchy, barring a Brussels job. I don't know. Maybe he can take Ursula's position. Maybe he can go pal around with Kaya Kallas and make empty threats towards the Russians. If you don't stop at the Dnieper River, we'll have no choice but to wage a total war on you with our advanced European industry. You say as your continent flounders. You say as you're entirely reliant on quote unquote migrant labor to pay pensions, that you end up paying more into the system to support these migrant laborers than they pay into the pensions. This is this is all to say to put aside the criticisms of, well, XYZ also happens in Russia. Yes, it does. And yes, there are issues to be discussed about the internal problems within Russia. But number one, that's not the question at hand. Number two, those issues take very different forms, and there's very different answers to those questions. And while they are similar, they are not the same problems. And also, I'll admit, this is a lot closer to home for me, okay? I live in the Western world. I live in North America. I am in an empire that is linked across the Atlantic. So while yes, you can talk about XYZ issue in Russia, China, Iran, whatever, that does not address the, let's be honest, civilizational freefall, administration freefall that the countries of the West are in right now. And whatever issues might be at hand in the other great powers of the world, that ultimately does not solve my problem, especially when you have this class in charge of the American empire and its subsidiaries who are hell bent to the point of apocalyptic destruction to stay on top of this monstrosity that they've created.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to our friends over at World War Now. If you don't know who they are, look them up, World War Now. Constantine did a show with them recently, a few weeks ago. I was listening to one of their recent podcasts, not the latest, but the one preceding it, and they were talking about Venezuela. And it's funny, Biden gets all the blame. He should get the blame for the migrant crisis, because he exceeded every single metric of any preceding president before him. But as it turns out, over 50%, as much as 65% of the migrants flooding in are Venezuelans,
Imagine that.
right? Which, like, Trump before Biden was destabilizing that country. And he's going to do it again. So you get ready for more Venezuelans coming
Yeah,
through.
yeah. Put a
Like,
bookmark in that
I don't
because I
know how
do.
much he's really deporting here.
Yeah, put a
Like,
bookmark in that because I do have that slated for later in the show.
okay.
But at this point, with everything going on, with the energy sabotages, I mean, this is only going to increase. And you also had some other bizarre cases of sabotages, like the ammunition factory in Tennessee about few weeks ago, a month ago, that blew up. And I mean, that very well
That
could.
was horrible.
Yeah, that was. I mean, even compared to a lot of the recent industrial accidents in the United States, that was still even. I think it
What
exceeded.
was it? 17 dead.
Yeah, it was something like that. And I think
Something like that, right? One
uh,
person they thought was there, but she wasn't there.
several more missing as well. And I
Yeah.
I don't know if everyone's been accounted for yet with that, but yeah, that was a disaster, frankly. And then you had a similar case in Germany, and you've also had, like I said, these cases throughout Europe, in both Eastern and Western Europe, of particularly arms factories and also just other key industrial sectors where they're just having these massive industrial accidents, which either A, is sabotage, which is a problem in of itself, or B, the state of our industry is so dilapidated that we're having the kind of accidents that China had 20 years ago. And the thing that
Hmm.
China was a laughingstock for 20 years ago. And look, I mean, yeah, there was legitimate criticism then, but as I've seen, and maybe it's just a very good PR job, those have decreased in China while increased in the West. What's that tell us?
Hmm.
And I suppose with all of that, we can pivot to some Middle Eastern news. And of course, we do have some stuff about the Gaza ceasefire, but I want to start with some news out of Syria, particularly Jolani's outreach to the Russians and the Turkish position in the region, because I think there are some interesting developments there. And I will be completely honest. You're free to disagree with me, of course. The audience is free to disagree with me. I think it was, while it had its moments, I think it overall was a bit embarrassing having Putin shaking Jelani's hand in the
Yeah.
Kremlin. And like I said, I know there's a larger strategic picture at play, and that I'm not saying like, oh, well, this should have never happened. Blah. Well, it should have never happened. Assad should still be in power. But with all that, like I said, I know not to have a black and white view on this, but the optics of this were horrible. That over a decade of blood and treasure spent fighting this man and his affiliates, and you shake his hand, you pretend like he's the legitimate successor to Assad, hasn't even gone through the effort of a fake election to legitimize his position, and they kiss, they make up, and they secure the status quo in Syria, because at this point, Syria has divided itself between a Turkish and Israeli sphere of influence, which I'm sure that's much better than Assad. Where northern Syria is de facto part of Turkey. It's like a northern Cyprus situation where they're issuing Turkish passports, Turkish documents, Turkish currency, and with all of that, we discussed this last week actually in depth. They've created a corridor between their policy with Armenia and Azerbaijan into Central Asia, where you have this free flow of a lot of these jihadists who originally come from Central Asia, and then you also have these jihadist groups that have coalesced in Syria over the past 10, 15 years. And thanks to the Turkish state and their affiliates, they have free passage from one to another, right in Russia's underbelly. And while it does make sense that, yes, I understand the Russians need to maintain their bases in Tartus and Latakia generally, uh, like I said, it was a very bad look. Now that being said, the Russians have still been one of the, let's just say, pillars of civilization in Latakia, that they have hosted a number of displaced people in and around their bases, from Jelani's butchers who have just been wandering the streets of Syria for the better part of the last year, uh, having random pogroms against whether it's the Alawites this week or the Shia or the Christians, whoever, and doing. We've discussed this in detail before. Doing the most brutal things, like I said, probably things that we haven't seen aside from the Israelis, things that we haven't seen since the initial rise of ISIS, where it's just enslavement, human trafficking, war brides, all of that. And now we have a situation in Syria, thanks to the pressure of Israel, which I think is funny enough. Jelani was supposed to be Tel Aviv's man, where the little reconciliation between the SDF, who are the Syrian Democratic Forces and not a Kurdish ethnic movement in the slightest, negotiations between them are falling apart. And now we're seeing the seeds planted less than a year after Assad fell from power, and after several years of the Syrian civil war having gone cold, where the front line wasn't very active, it wasn't the kind of fighting that you saw in 2013, 2014, 2015. It was a relatively stable, if not difficult, situation in Syria. You weren't having constant fighting. Well, it looks like less than a year after Assad's gone, we have the brink of another round of the Syrian civil war, which we're probably going to get. And we said this when Assad fell. We said this before Assad
Mm-hmm.
fell, that
Mm-hmm.
the minute he goes, this is going to blow up. This is going to escalate because there are too many forces, both within and outside of Syria, who have a vested interest in keeping this country divided and in a state of perpetual war. And I suppose the ultimate lesson on this is, as valuable as his friendship might seem, as valuable as his cooperation might seem, Erdogan is planning to stab you in the back every time you make a deal with him. Every time you speak to the man, he is thinking of a way. How can I step on your toes to come out on top of the situation? I know some people might say, oh, that's politics, that's global politics in general, but he excels at that. What, 6, 8 years of feigned peace negotiations between the Syrian rebels and the government, and the so called reconciliation between Syria, Turkey, and the Arab states, for Assad to show up at the Arab League, and 3 weeks later, the Arab League is embracing Jelani as Assad is forced to flee from the country. This, I mean, while there's more than one actor at play here, and while there's many factors at play here, I think this should be a sobering reminder, especially for the Russians, who, because of many reasons, have a number of dealings with the Turks, to not trust Erdogan and to not trust the Turks in general. Because even after him, even if you have somebody who goes back to, like, say, the secular Kemalist kind of worldview, Erdogan's established that this is a uh, very good position to play internationally, to find yourself at the crossroads of the great powers. And he's going to continue to do this. And they're going to continue to fan the flames of pan-Turkic nationalism or Islamism, depending on whichever flavor it takes, or maybe a little bit of both. And it's snowballing into what is going to be a greater threat. And I know I've talked about this for the past, I don't know, 2 or 3 episodes, but I think it does bear repeating that you have Syria is probably the most glaring example of this. You have this Turkish threat snowballing, and that they are probably going to be the next front. If you want to talk about, well, what's going to be the next thing to tie them down to Ukraine, it's probably going to be something with Turkey, something with Caucasus, or something with Central Asia. And while I can understand the maybe mindset behind meeting Jolani and really figuring out what the position in Syria is, optically, this looks like Russians on the back foot.
Yeah. It's yeah. Um, Now I don't know. There are still several thousands of Syrian Christians, Alawites, and other minorities that would have been butchered by Jelani's men that are at those bases. Now, the
Yes.
peculiar thing is Jelani wants the Russians to stay there. He thinks that the Russians could be used as a deterrent against Israeli attacks. I mean, Russia cannot fight Ukraine and Israel at the same time.
Which conversely,
They,
the
they
Israelis want the Russians there as a counterbalance to the Turks.
that's right. That's right. Who would have thought? Remember when Assad fell, I said like, well, okay, so this is like yes, there were mass killings that were just beginning, but we still didn't see reports of all these poor people running to the Russian bases for safety. Not yet. And I said, who are Russia's allies in the Middle East? There aren't any. I mean, Iran, but not in Syria, not in the Levant,
Not in the Arab
obviously.
world, really.
Yeah. So where, like, why stay there? Um, Now, I don't think the Russians are staying there just because they want to keep about 7 to 9,000 people safe. I don't know what the number is. I don't hear any reports anymore. Whereas I did routinely hear reports in the first half of 2025. So I don't know. I think maybe Putin is thinking, look, this country under Jelani isn't going to last very long either. Because of course the Kurds still have issues with them, and there was a flare up as well, um, uh, a couple of week back or 2 weeks back, where Gilani forces and the Kurds engaged in combat in urban centers. One of them, I think, was in Aleppo or an area just outside of Aleppo. In any case, Russia like can't provide more than whatever it is that they're doing, and Putin might be thinking it's better to stay than to leave, but not with the same kind of expenses that were poured in to support the region. Like that's done, that's over with now. Now it's just maintenance of the basis. That's it.
Yes, this is just an outpost in a failed state, which we've seen. Actually, the Americans do several times. I think parts of the Horn of Africa are probably the most uh, obvious examples of that. And for a number of reasons, and I don't think it's necessarily a humanitarian mission, although we are seeing that as a secondary effect. It is maintaining that port outside the Black Sea into the Mediterranean and close to the Suez Canal, and there's still some strategic weight to it. And yes, while like I said, this meeting was bad optics, embarrassing on a number of fronts, this likely is the Russians biding their time for what they do expect to be a fractured Syria situation. And perhaps out of that, because Latakia and the area they have their bases is concentrated near a heavily Alawite area. And you also have the Iranians, as of a few months ago, this was close towards the beginning of the year, reorganizing some of the pro Assad forces and even some of the opposition forces who have had their split from Jelani into a new banner of the so-called Axis of Resistance. So they could be hedging their bets that there might be a separatist state along the coast, which I don't think is unreasonable. I don't think they're going to take the initiative to say organize and support that. That I think that'd probably be more of an Iranian project, which with how things are going with Iran, it could go either way, whether they would support something like that or whether you actually could have the internal support in Syria among local populations to establish that and then appeal to a foreign sponsor like the Russians or the Iranians. So it does also make you wonder why this was necessary, because clearly, even if Jelani wanted to expel the Russian forces, he would have no means to. He could send maybe roving gangs of jihadists to attack the base, but even with the small contingent the Russians have there, they could probably easily defend it from any sort of attack, unless it was just wave after wave. In which case, I don't think even the thugs fighting under Giuliani are that brazenly dedicated to, say, charging into the figurative and literal machine gun fire to do that.
Hmm. Yeah, so it remains to be seen. So far, it doesn't look like any of the big players there, the US, the Turks, or the Israelis, are going to attack those Russian bases. That may not be the case later. And this is mainly because, as we've pointed out, Syria is not a closed book, not by any means, and it won't be. It will be like Iraq. It will be ungovernable. Turkey's quest to subdue the Kurds in Syria has failed. His, he's created some division between Kurds in Iraq and Kurds in Syria, but largely, he has a small buffer zone, but it hasn't really gone his way. I can't imagine he's happy with the Jews occupying the outskirts of Damascus. I saw videos where Israeli Jews are like walking around inside Damascus. Like, what they're thinking of. They're thinking larger Israel. They think this belongs to them, right? So, what are they going to do? And this kind of ties in with what Conrad and Dmitry have been talking about on World War Now in terms of Orthodox prophecy, that eventually Russia will be dragged into some kind of a conflict with the Israelis. And it very well might be because the Arabs in that region will see the error of their ways. And I mean, it's like I said, the Sunnis have been just insane when it comes to their policies. How do they not see that this has completely backfired on them?
That
You
no
know,
matter what they do, it seems like they're always getting played. The Arab
always
Sunnis,
getting played.
it's uh, really ever since. I would actually say, even though Saddam Hussein, I don't think he was that much of a religious sectarian. Since at least Saddam Hussein, if not before that, where
Hmm.
they've always been played. And you saw this with Arafat and the Palestinians, where we'll agree to Oslo, we'll agree to sit down and shake hands and negotiate, and pretty please, can we have the two-state solution? And of course, that falls through. You even see some elements of this in Hamas. Now, I will say, because of the current war, or the, I guess, on again, off again war with the supposed ceasefire that's in place, there has been some reevaluation of this, but even a large number of, say, the Hamas aligned Palestinian Sunnis also fall for this. Oh, we'll take the peace deal. We'll talk this out, and we'll bide some time, and surely this will be the ace in the hole that'll help us get one over on the Zionists. And it never works out that way. You see this in Egypt. You see this in the Gulf states. Uh, I don't necessarily want to say these are gullible people. I mean, I think a lot of them are, but I don't think that's quite the right word, quite the word I would use to describe them, at least. But there, if I had to put it this way, and this might be a crude analogy, but it's the best I can think of. Crude, not as in like insufficient, but they're playing a game of checkers against opponents who are playing chess, and
Yes.
they think they're winning, and they think that it kind of goes back to, I bring this up all the time when it comes to the Syrian civil war. We're going to have this multinational Muslim army, and we're going to build it up on the border of Israel. We're going to march towards Damascus because in somewhere deep in the Hadith it says, "Oh, if we can topple Damascus, Al Quds will soon follow," or whatever nonsense they've cooked up about that. And also, any Iranian aligned groups, any Shia Kufars, they need to go, okay? Because they're actually worse than the Israelis. They are worse than the Zionists, to the point where we will collaborate with them in order to drive them out, because whatever. And you can actually go back to some of the stuff that we did with George McMillan, some of the episodes we did towards the end of last year, beginning of this year, and he does talk about that. that like Black Flags idea that comes out of
Yes,
like Islamic
that's
prophecy.
fascinating. I bet that's a big motivator. But it's a motivator for the dummies who fall for it.
Yes, yeah, and it's these people, and it does remind me in many ways of like evangelicals and Protestants in the Anglosphere, where their own
Yes.
religion is just completely weaponized against them to the point where they support things that are completely counterintuitive to their stated goals.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And it's this idea that if they just supercharge, this prophecy, it'll come to fruition. They just have to play their cards right, and it's always there. The potentiality never changes.
Yeah, it actually is a very striking parallel between these Sunni jihadists and the evangelicals. And I know that that's a statement you'd expect some Democrat to make during the Bush years. But if you think in this way, actually, it makes a lot of sense where it's just, if we just trust the plan hard enough and do things that are counterintuitive to everything we believe, eventually it'll all work out.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. It's mind-boggling.
I suppose that is actually also indicative of broader right wing politics in the Western world as well, where if we just do a bunch of stuff that's counterintuitive to what we believe, it'll all just work out in the end if we trust the plan. You see that pattern crop up a lot. This blind hope people have in these kind of things.
If we just give these people who come from this, this little country in the Middle East, they'll be kind to us, and then they'll like let us get our civilization back. It's so dumb.
They'll
I don't know how people still fall for it.
like I said, blind optimism and hope where none is to be found is, I think, probably the main culprit there. Just having, I don't know, maybe too optimistic of a view, not willing to, and I'm not saying you have to like be like despairingly pessimistic, but blinding yourself with optimism, I should say, is the culprit to a lot of this. And with that being said, how about that Gaza ceasefire? I'm assured it is the
Three thousand years, three
most
thousand year war, and Trump put an end to it.
that's
Never say the Americans can't achieve anything they want.
that is
They set their minds to.
that is almost as impressive as ending the Albania-Azerbaijan war. Almost, okay, because that one was brutal. That one was a doozy. But he managed to do it. The Israelis have not broken the ceasefire thus far. But I will say, and while I do think that this thing is has the constitution of a wet paper bag and will fall apart probably in really any day now, it hasn't been as blatantly violated as I would have expected. That
I agree with you. Now, several dozens, if not 100, have already been killed by the Israelis. But
yeah,
yeah,
and I hate to say it, but that actually seems like a low number from what I was expecting.
compared to what they have been doing, yeah.
Yes, yes, and I'll just put it this way: I expect the ceasefires to be violated, but I'm surprised how low intensity those violations are. And
Mm.
I think at this point, I don't know, maybe Trump is really hardballing Netanyahu, and it's like, come on, man, I need the W at home. I need the peace deal. Just work with me, and I'll make sure that those charges don't go through. We'll pull all the strings we need to, and blah blah blah. And
Yeah, it's Trump's desperate urge to accomplish a big W. Look at that. Look what I did before the midterms. He wants this talking point, and he's not going to get it. Like I never once believed when the whole topic about the tomahawks and oh he's not going to give. I immediately thought like he's going to give him the tomahawks. He eventually will. Like it's just a strategy for him to try to end the war in Ukraine on America's terms.
yeah, he wants something he can bring to the next rally and say that Trump has ended actually 11 wars now. Hold on, make that 12, 13. I don't know how many more wars this guy is going to end, but it looks like he's pulling all the strings. He's the greatest diplomat since Metternich and Kissinger. That's all I can say. Okay. And with heavy hitters like Marco Rubio at the State Department and a vacant national security advisor position, what more of a dream team could you ask for? It's, I mean, I don't know what to make of this. In terms of what's going to be the breaking point? Because Netanyahu, it looks like he has survived figuratively and literally yet another day where he's managed to. I think he came up with some excuse to stave off his legal issues yet again, where he will never face trial for these legal issues. And if there's any indication, if there's any hint he might have these issues, he'll be in Florida by day's end. It's without question. He will have refuge somewhere. He will have status somewhere. But I think the bigger question here, and I know we touched on a bit of this last episode and the episode before that in terms of Israel's position. I'm not talking about reputation. I'm not talking about diplomacy. But when it comes down to brass tacks, when it comes down to economics, when it comes down to military supplies, when it comes down to what actually helps a nation survive in the realest sense of the word, uh, I would argue, and feel free to add or detract however you see fit, that Israel, beyond any reputational and diplomatic consequences, which those have also been quite heavy, but beyond any of that, they have done irreparable damage to their stance as a nation in a strategic sense, where their economy is likely going to take years to recover from the hits it's taken in this war. Because with this, a large sector of the Israeli economy was set down. Tens of thousands of people were forced to leave northern Israel when the war with Hezbollah was active, because Hezbollah had almost free range to fire in the northern Israel. And while there were some attempts to stop that, while there were some operations with that farce of an invasion of southern Lebanon or the pager attacks, which did do a number on Hezbollah leadership, let's not kid ourselves there, but ultimately they were
Hmm.
able to reorganize and restructure. Uh, with that, and with just the state of war and the state of panic in Israel, the economy has ground to a halt. I haven't seen the official figures, but I wouldn't be surprised if, like many other countries, they are pushing towards a recession. Their arms industry is certainly suffering. I mean, look at the 12-day war. They had to bring in the Americans to stop that because their air defenses, even the ones provided by the Americans, were simply insufficient to deal with the volume of Iranian strikes. And that even if Iranian weapons were subpar, which I think, if you want to make that argument, that's an entirely different discussion. Even with that, the Iranians still managed to keep the pressure on Israel, where I don't think a barrage of missiles is enough to destroy a country or to topple it, but it's enough to drive it into dysfunction if you have constant waves of bombardment. If the Iranians would have the supplies to make that continue happening, which I don't think, obviously, they couldn't do it indefinitely, but numerically, I do think they had the advantage when it came to missiles and drones to launch. But Israeli air defenses simply could not keep up. They've, pardon the expression, poisoned the well with these countries they had decades of brokered peace with, such as Jordan, such as Egypt. Not that I think these countries are going to do anything, but much of the, let's just say, mutual understanding that was built up between these nations has degraded. The Gulf states are wishy washy because they're wondering, well, when are they going to come after us next? Even though they have been more than cooperative with Israel in the past, mostly thanks to the efforts of Washington. And also, you have Jelani, who's Israel's best friend for 2 weeks, and then Israel turns on him because he isn't giving in to their demands fast enough. And it's to the point where, not only that, if we bring in the reputational issue, uh, about half of the Western world despise these people for a number of reasons. A lot of them on the left, but certainly no shortage of them on the right wing either. And the only support you really have for them is the American political class among other European elites, who themselves are playing good cop, bad cop, and also appealing to their own Muslim populations for a number of different reasons by bringing some sort of recognition to the Palestinian state. At what point does this country recover? How does this country uh, really move on going forward? Are we looking at a scenario where global pressure, especially after a generational change in leadership in the United States, and I know that the lobby and the political influence network that they have in the United States is probably stronger than a generational change, but just bear with me here. But are we looking at a scenario where Israel is looking down the same barrel that South Africa did, where they are forced to dismantle themselves and make concessions?
Yeah, I mean, the way they're going to get past it is by America printing a lot more dollars.
Yeah, and and it's crunch time for that because the American ability to do that, while it's not gone, it does diminish
Yeah,
every
yeah,
year.
absolutely, absolutely, and that is it, isn't it? It's like honestly, that whole debate about a BRICS dollar, like they don't need to have a BRICS dollar. They just need for other countries to stop investing in the US dollar. Now, small chunks have been taken out of it. Certain countries have more autonomy than they did 20 years ago. And what you're seeing is America's responding to this trend that they haven't been able to brook. So I think that's what's going on. And based on America's reactions, um, they're very serious about this. I think they understand the trend, right? They need to conquer Russia first and foremost. And I guess have we touched on the sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft, or
Yeah,
what's the
briefly, yes, when we talked about the energy sabotage.
yeah?
But if you have more to say about them, please do.
Well, I mean, we'll see how serious this is because it's something that Biden avoided doing. Why, I don't know, whether it was on the escalatory ladder to begin with. Maybe it was. So we're just seeing that now because a year later, the war is still going. And America desperately wants this war to stop. Well, freeze it, not stop it. And it wants to resume it, but it can't resume it because it doesn't have the production capabilities to do that. Um, so we'll see what happens because the pressure, the tariff pressure on India has not caused India to do anything. But I'm hearing that the Chinese have stopped some imports of Russian oil from Lukoil.
They've
We'll
stopped
see. I think
sea-based
it's
imports, is what the reports are.
say that again.
The reports are the Chinese have suspended sea-based imports of Russian oil.
Okay, I see. Well, of course. I mean, they're just gonna use the land anyways,
Yeah, I
so
mean, there's a reason
big
they've
deal.
invested billions in Power of Siberia 1 and 2.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I mean, it's just an untenable position where I'll really believe this when I see it, but this is probably just a diplomatic nicety where they're, oh, we'll cooperate, because I think at this point, Beijing certainly understands that if the Russians are treated this way, Washington is not going to be any more generous to China. And there's really no question about that. And I'll get into some of Trump's comments later that he made about China vis-a-vis Venezuela when we get to that point. But if you had any closing thoughts on the Middle East, the floor is yours.
No, no.
Yeah, but
Oh, I was gonna say this. I messaged you about like this mimetic spiral that the Israelis have gone into. Now, I don't want to get like too conspiratorial or into or go into like some conspiracy territory when it
we
comes
would
to
never
like
do it.
we would never, yeah, uh child sacrifice, as it were. But hear me out for a second. I remember way back many years ago. This is like 2001, 2002. I think it was 2002. And I read Gerard's I See Satan Fall Like Lightning, which is one of the most incredible books, especially about understanding mimetic disorders and how mimeticism works, right? So essentially, one of the clearest examples that he cites in the New Testament is how the Jews demanded the crucifixion of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the Romans felt that they had to oblige them, and so they did. And immediately after his crucifixion, they exchanged gifts, right? So the sacrifice of Christ in this sense causes a momentary peace between the Jews and the Romans. The killing of so many children in Gaza, which is well over 11 or 12,000, uh, without any repercussions, no repercussions. I would say has galvanized the Israelis, right? Because when you commit an act, a transgression that is so horrid, now before you commit it, you'll have some people on your side which will say, "Don't do it, don't do it," right? It's bad. But if there's no repercussions, you will most likely bring over people to your side. Certainly, people that were on the fence will be more committed to your opinion. And that's what I meant when the war started back in 2023. I said, don't cheer on the Israelis. If you don't appreciate Jewish power in Western countries, in European countries, you're only going to embolden them, and they will use this against you. And that's why, with that, you know, synagogue attack in England, in what was it, Manchester?
Yes.
Ed Miliband, of course, said, "Oh, it's not safe for Jews." I mean, we've seen, um, non-white migrants killing white British people on a regular basis. Ed Miliband will say nothing about that,
I
but
mean,
because he's Jewish, of course, he's going to stick up for his people.
yeah, that's not even getting into the grooming gangs. Like you'll notice the type
Yeah,
of minor girls that they targeted. Okay, and you'll, I mean, look
not
at
one of them is brown.
no,
Not
no,
one.
yeah, it's these white working class neighborhoods. And you look at the victims discovered on Epstein Island. It's a lot of these young girls who were trafficked out after the fall of the Soviet Union and the Iron Curtain. These countries that had
Yep.
immense. I mean, you want to talk about the Ukraine connection? Ukraine, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union, was one of the largest hubs of child trafficking. And I think the kind of crimes associated with child trafficking and wanton slaughter of children, say in Gaza, I mean, those two things are very deeply connected for reasons that I probably can't go into on air and that you probably already know. And
Yeah.
I'll spare you guys the mental imagery of that as much as I want to be spared the mental imagery of that. And you do see this continue on, and that's also all part of this trend. There are no repercussions for it. It's always emboldening. It's always we can get away with more and
Yep.
more and more. We can be more and more depraved. We can do whatever we want. We can, uh, on a grander scale, bring the world to the brink of war if it means taking an inch of territory. And I think you're right. That is the position we are in right now, which has brought us to the edge of a figurative and literal destruction.
Hmm.
But with all that being said, because I think we've exhausted that topic as much as we can for today, unless you
Yep.
have any final thoughts, we could
No,
talk
that's
about
it.
Trump's comments on Venezuela and China and the regime change that's totally coming in Venezuela and Latin America, and that Trump's going to focus on the home front. He's not, and how this is all going to help us. When again, I miss the days when the questions of North America and South America were how much of Canada and Greenland are we going to annex? That he gave up on those projects far too soon. Did he get the concessions he wanted? Is that what this is all about? Or did he get distracted? Did he just forget
Mm.
about it? But those were far more fun, far more entertaining conversations than uh, regime change attempt in Venezuela. What for the third or fourth take? We already tried Juan Guaido. We tried what's his name Gonzalez, who didn't end up taking office, and now we've blown up. I think at this point 9 Venezuelan vessels, and I know what some people might say, and I will say on the surface I can sympathize. If these are drug vessels, then why should they have any rights? Why should we let them get even close to our country? But I want you guys to apply a little more skepticism to this. Why would such small vessels be, and they might be drug smuggling vessels, but why at that point can we not just interdict them with traditional means? We have the largest navy, not the largest navy in the world, the most capable navy in the world. We have a very capable coast guard. That we should be able to stop any ship entering our territorial waters carrying any significant amount of drugs if we were to properly police our own waters. And you don't need this theatrics of just blowing up random boats that may or may not be carrying drug smugglers or may not be carrying illicit materials, whatever. And like I said, I'm not one who says like, oh, we have to, play, nice and play softball with the drug dealers. No, I mean, look what these people do to our country. That's a no-brainer. But number one, let's talk about the ones who are already in our country. That seems to not be addressed despite some token deportations. I know some might disagree with me on that, but um, the numbers are wholly insufficient, and even among domestic criminals who are citizens, and I think you guys know the type of people I'm talking about, and I'm not applying that to one particular group, but you know the class of people I'm talking about when it comes to that, just the low lifes, if you will. Plenty of them peddling drugs, and I understand that you need to get to the source, you need to cut the head off the snake, but at a certain point, you look at Trump's Venezuela policy, you look at Trump's Latin American policy. He's also tried to extend this to Cuba and Mexico at this point. This is not about stemming the flow of drugs, which could be accomplished very easily with proper border security both on land and at sea, which American military and police are more than capable of doing. We could have an ironclad border. We could have completely safe territorial waters if we were to properly focus our assets where they mattered. But this is a backdoor into more fruitless regime change policies, and I can guarantee you that with the policies that would be pursued in places like Venezuela in particular, but also Colombia and increasingly Mexico, this is only going to increase migrant flows. This is only going to embolden the drug
Yeah.
trade. And think what you will about Maduro. I'm against overthrowing him just on principle, and also I don't think that the benefits would outweigh the cost of that. But even if he is a subversive element, even playing devil's advocate, assuming he is knee deep in the drug trade, it's better to apply backdoor pressure negotiations in a situation like that than to just go in and knock everything down and expect the pieces to pick themselves up. Not that they expect the pieces to pick themselves up, but arguing from the argument that they would give us. It is better to take care of these things with some kind of backdoor diplomacy. And that is not happening because that is not the intention, and that was never the intention. And that they are willing to wreak havoc, cause hell in their own backyard, because they will never deal with any of the consequences of that. Uh, in the vain hope of, I don't know, securing something maybe strategic for getting one over on the Russians or the Chinese because they both have amicable relations with the Venezuelans. And if you wanted to throttle Chinese energy supplies, I mean, Venezuela, sure, that is a part of it. And I know that does have some play in why the Americans wanted to reassert greater control over the Panama Canal. But it's not going to make or break the Chinese economy. And even if you wanted any sort of, say, just like resource grab, this isn't exactly conducive to it either, because assuming we do destabilize the region in the interest of securing Venezuelan energy resources, we're talking about security teams, we're talking about teams that are actually going to have to be able to manage the extraction and transportation of this energy. So even if this were just a blatant resource war, the pieces don't fall together for that. And I am honestly left puzzled on what the ultimate aim here is. Is this just for the sake of domestic victory? We're fighting the cartels, we're taking down Latin American communist regimes or whatever, and that's just something so Trump can brag about that on Truth Social or at a rally? Because that's the only thing that makes sense to me at this point. It's all just PR, and there's not even like an ulterior motive that like would play to the geostrategic advantage of the United States. Like, as much as one might disagree with that, you could at least see the rationale there. But perhaps I have a blind spot here, but I'm not seeing it.
So, my guess is this: because Venezuela has the largest oil deposits, and particularly the heavy like heavy oil, the one used for manufacturing. My guess is this: let's say the situation in the Middle East worsens dramatically, right? The thing that America is most worried about is losing control of the Middle East and losing control of the the petrodollar, right? You could argue that Iran might even have a plan to cut off the Straits of Hormuz to draw America into um, landing, a ground force in Iran. As foolish and crazy as that may seem, right? But Iran, I don't know what would happen to Iran, but I know for the Americans, they would fare worse than Iraq. And let's just say that to bolster against the trend that we already discussed earlier, where countries are moving away from the dollar, or at least in certain important, very strong countries no longer have to stay within the American financial system, the dollar, et cetera, et cetera. Because investment into America, of course, has grown despite this. And of course, the reason for it is very simple. When the Dutch were at war with the Spanish, the Dutch brought their gold to Britain, and that was a safe way to keep the gold from falling into enemy hands. And that's what America represents to like a lot of the West, towards Western Europe. And we talked about on previous shows, especially after Todd's book, with the translation. It's not an official translation into English. He says that most of the American-bred European elites, they're investing in American offshore banks right now, not Swiss banks. And of course, one of the reasons why Switzerland could afford to take sides in the Russo-Ukrainian war is because um, it doesn't have to be neutral in the way that it did based on investments. Because a lot of these Europeans are basically getting more for their investment by investing in American banks. But let's say that things aren't going as well, and America would like to hedge against things getting worse. So what they're going to do is secure Venezuela. But what they also want to do is make sure BRICS doesn't grow in South America. But they would also get, like, there's many reasons why. Of course, Trump only sees the big W. He's got to get this done before campaigning for the midterms. Uh, I did what Biden couldn't. I'm going to bring in even more migrants. Just you watch.
But it's okay. We'll ask them a question at the border. Do you support Israel?
Yes, of course. Of course I do. You loco? Of course. I love Israel. Give me money. so so I mean that's essentially what's going to happen. That's what they want.
That I mean that makes the most sense out of everything I've heard thus far. But there were some related comments that Trump did make on China during this Venezuela rant, and let me see if I can pull up these exact ones because it's funny because this was all in the midst of we're going to talk to China, we're going to get along, we're going to we're going to de-escalate, we're going to talk to the Russians, and the Chinese about nuclear arms control. But then he also says China makes $100 million smuggling fentanyl into the U.S. I will be speaking to Xi Jinping about this.
Yeah.
And, and he also says that they're doing it through Venezuela, of course, and that there's going to be attacks in Venezuela because of this. But while I don't doubt that the major powers have roles in the drug trade, that's not without question. Like that's beyond the question because they do. We've seen this with the American intelligence. We've seen this with intelligence agencies all around the world. There's no reason to believe China would be an exception on any extraordinary grounds. Perhaps on practical grounds, but not on any extraordinary grounds. Well, while I stand by that ultimate assessment, it doesn't make too much sense the allegations there where you figure that well yes there probably is some Chinese involvement in the international drug trade as there's probably several intelligence agencies involved in the international drug trade. This just seems a little out of nowhere that of course
Hmm.
the Chinese are smuggling fentanyl and that we need to crack down on them because of that and that it just seems like a cover statement for something they already wanted to do. It seems like a cover statement to
Yeah.
justify these souring relations with China. And I mean, even if hypothetically, like this was 100% true and they were involved, yes, there are retaliatory measures that can be taken against other great powers for doing these things without escalating into full scale war. And in those cases, arguably, they should be taken. However, priority number one is actually mitigating the crisis. As we've seen when, for example, in the 90s, we saw this. Drugs were smuggled into Russia through Central Asia, probably with the assistance of the CIA. While there still is a drug problem in Russia, I don't want to deny that. First and foremost, it's taking care of the problem domestically. It's sealing the borders in which these drugs are flowing, and it is cracking down on the criminal networks that do fund them. That's first and foremost. And then, secondly, you can address these issues through a number of means with the other great powers that does not involve outright belligerence and escalating to war. There are retaliatory measures you can take. There's a lot of stuff you can do behind the scenes. Like I said, that's all just the tools of diplomacy, and we could sit here all day talking about that. But this doesn't seem like it's something, like I said, assuming it's 100% true, this doesn't seem like something that's brought up to actually solve the issue, but rather to justify further actions both in Latin America and abroad that ultimately are not going to solve the situation. And I've said before, if there were some legitimate military action we could take in Latin America to secure the interests of the American nation and the American people that actually would stem the migrant flows, that actually would stem the drug trade, then yes, I think it'd be fully logical to go forward with that. And assuming it were put forward in good faith, that is something I could support. But thus far, I'm not seeing any proposal of the sort. I'm not seeing anything that even comes close to that kind of proposal. And I can only assume I am being fed falsehoods. I am being fed a lie in order to justify something even more stupid.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Again, History Legends did a really good breakdown on how the attack would happen because um, is it Caracas? That's the main city of
Yeah, the
Venezuela.
main city and the capital.
Yes, and the capital. That now it is flanked. It is not right on the Caribbean. There's a mountain range in front of it, and a pretty extensive one. Of course, it's very dense jungle. So they would probably have to go much further down south and then come back up north, where it's quite flat and a lot of farmland. So and now the Russians have sent over hundreds of their versions of the manpad. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. There was a rumor, of course, that some Venezuelan general on anonymity said that we'll give you everything. The resources, just don't attack us. I don't know. I mean, Maduro is not like. I know he tries to give off this image of this great socialist leader in South America, but he does pander. Remember, he used to say that he had some Semitic background.
But I understand what you're saying, and like what one might think at Castro is irrelevant to the following statement, but Castro was at the very least willing to thumb his nose at the U.S. He was willing to host Soviet missiles. He was willing to play hardball in that regard. Even Chavez, I think, if he were still alive, would be somebody more in that vein. But Maduro seems like a guy who just ended up in this job just kind of out of dumb luck, and I don't see him thumbing his nose at the American empire the same way that like other leftist or socialist or communist Latin American leaders would have. Like I said, regardless of what one thinks of them, there are certain ones I think, particularly like Castro, stand out who will be willing to actually live up to his words and follow through with what he says. But Maduro simply does not seem like that kind of guy, and you could see a scenario where any sort of regime change or action Venezuelan is predicated by just institutional weakness in their government.
Hmm.
But ultimately, I mean, this has been something that Trump has been fixated on since 2019. Like I said, since the Juan Guaido situation, since he was the legitimate real leader of Venezuela, blah, blah, blah. And while I do believe they are gearing up for some sort of operation, I do have to question the extent of it. I think any degree of operation would just, especially at this point under the current circumstances, would be foolish. It would solve nothing of any value that actually matters. Sure, it might help some vague interest of the American empire, but in terms of the actual American nation or any Western nation or really any nation, this would be completely counterintuitive to anything. It would inflame the migrant crisis. It would inflame the drug trade. All of it. All of it. It would be the classic case of blowback, going back to just the basic foreign policy tenets of why American intervention always fails in any real sense, because it's a disaster. We're emboldening all the things that we're supposedly trying to stop. And like I said, I know that there's deeper agenda here. I'll keep hammering that point home. But don't be fooled in this one, because this one is one that is an easier sell than Ukraine and Israel. That people who would just have absolutely nothing to do with the war in Ukraine, war in Israel, screw them, let them deal with whatever consequences they've brought on themselves, might be convinced like, oh, this is Latin America, oh, this is the drug trade, this might actually serve our interest. And like I said, those are understandable feelings, but do not take the bait. These are not being done in good faith. These are not being done for the interest of you, anyone you care about, or your nation. And they're going to try like hell to paint it like that, but it's anything but.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Unless you have any final stories, that's all I really had to say for this week.
No, that's it for me too. I did send you something.
Oh no. Oh, okay. I will on off this because I'm not sure how our overlords on YouTube feel about these
Yeah.
kind of images. So I will give you guys a glimpse of this image, but it is pretty good. Because this is really what it feels like, and this gets down to the essence of everything we were talking about. So go ahead, enjoy it for your 3 seconds, and if you want to see it again, just rewind the video, okay? But that is a good one. I've seen that one before, and that is really what it feels like. And I think they've also used that meme template like for it's like
Oh
when
yeah, yeah.
yeah
It's
when,
heavily
yeah,
used.
when war in Iraq and Syria, it's like, oh, it's time for jihad, blah blah blah. When war in Palestine, oh, it's hopeless. The Ummah is helpless, brothers. And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I mean that's really what it feels like. But with that aside, I thank you. That was a good way to close out the show. We'll keep fighting for democracy at the next No Kings protest. You can count on us to be there.
Yes.
Uh,
Protect NATO.
yeah, protect NATO from blunt fight fascism, and stand up for the East Wing of the White House because Trump wants to build a Russian ballroom. That's what I saw. No, wait, here. Let me. I'm going to take a detour. I need to see if I can find this. Where they compared one of the ballrooms in the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg to
Yeah,
Trump's
yeah.
proposal. So I here
Oh my
I'm
God.
going. I'm
I
going.
love how this conspiracy is so ridiculous. Like as I said, I had a Ukrainian friend like, what's Trump doing? I go, he's not doing anything. He's gonna eventually give them the right to do this. Like I said, tomahawks are also old. Like they're not that great. Like
Yeah.
it's not gonna fundamentally change that many things, but he'll eventually give them what they want.
Yeah. Let me get this up because I sent it to you and take this with a grain of salt. But I was consulting somebody who knows a little bit more about this than me. But I think they said the image on the top is actually one of the throne rooms of the Winter Palace. And like I
Oh,
said,
I've been there.
yeah, please do tell. Please do confirm
Oh,
my
it's
story.
beautiful.
Yeah, yes, but this is
It's in the Hermitage. I've been there.
yes.
Oh, it's magnificent.
But the counter theory I actually saw, somebody was going to an architectural rant, and they said that this is not proof that Trump is a Russian asset, but this is proof that Trump is a closeted Francophile, because this looks far more like something you would see in France on the bottom
Well, yeah.
picture. Yes.
Yes, that's true.
Yes, and you know what? Given his relationship with Macron, and given the fact that Trump actually got the idea for a military parade when he was at the Bastille Day parade, I think the secret to all of this is that Trump is a closeted Francophile.
I will say this though, it is even a little it is a little less ostentatious than Versailles. So
Yes, yes.
yeah.
But But this is what Trump is doing to the East Wing of the White House. This is fascism. He destroyed Barack Obama's basketball court. Okay, this cannot go unchallenged, and we need another No Kings protest too.
No kings, no kings.
No kings, no ballrooms, no high culture. Okay, basketball hoops for everyone.
Trump becomes the Tsar of Russia. There it is.
Well, I believe that some genetic.
That's all he wanted.
Yes.
That's all he wanted.
But now that you mention, I think there was some geneticist that said that Trump and Putin were both descended from Rurik.
Oh God.
I think it was like one of like these like Russian conspiracy theorists. You know the type.
Yeah.
It was like, and this was like 2016, 2017, back like when things would have been really good between all of that. So yeah, they said
Russians don't exactly trust Trump anymore. So
yeah,
that's gone.
But it was like this guy was laying out this thing about how Trump and Putin are both are distant cousins through the line of Rurik. Which, you know what, I have no reason to believe it, but I choose to. But with that last piece of breaking news, we'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.
Goodbye and take care.